What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Mindful Muscle podcast. Got another book review for you guys today. Super excited to dive into this one with Coach Jake. And today we're going to be looking at Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. And Jake, what are your just kind of like initial thoughts on this one?
So initial thoughts, I feel like I resonate more with obstacles the way more than ego is the enemy. We were kind of talking off screen before about how you felt like this book had some things in it that were a little bit repetitive to you. And that's more how I felt about ego is the enemy. I feel like I resonate more with the obstacle is the way. And maybe it's just because there's been more time in between revisiting it for the first time. So I probably read this book in 2019 for the first time, whereas I read Ego is the Enemy in 2020. So I really like going back and revisiting it. A lot of really good, memorable, just succinct quotes, and a lot of things that I just noticed from my day-to-day life, things that I keep in mind on a daily basis, on a monthly basis, that were just kind of affirmed. And so a few things I can go over here, but it was nice to, sometimes it's nice when a book just affirms your thinking, which I know can be sort of a dangerous line to toe, but I think in a positive way. This book did that for me.
Yeah, no, yeah, definitely. I think it's better than I initially like when we were talking. I was like kind of okay. Like, it's really good. And I think the thing with books is like they hit you with different quotes at different times based on what you need. So we'll dive into all of that. And there's a couple that I took away that I think I'll remember for the rest of my life. But as I mentioned earlier, author Ryan Holiday, uh, listen time, it's only about 6 hours, 7 minutes. So super quick listen. Was able to do it
Yeah.
in like 3 hours at 2x speed.
That's the
Super
nice
quick.
thing about all the books in this series is they're all very digestible and pretty short relative to other books.
Yep. Pages 224, released May 1st, 2014, which was 8 years ago. So good amount
Yeah.
of time. I put it as readability as a 9 out of 10, rating 8 out of 10. So I flipped it from ego as the enemy. I think for me, it was just nice having the sections broken up into uh, the the three sections he had. So perception, action, and will. And so it was basically like three ways to look at the obstacle. And I think part of what had this book feeling redundant to me is a couple months ago, I finished a similar book on leadership by Jocko Willink. And the whole concept of circumnavigating your obstacle was like right away what he started talking about in the perception piece. And it's like, if
Mm-hmm.
you've ever gotten in an argument with someone, the direct yelling approach is not the approach that you want to take. And like,
Mm-hmm.
that's what so many people do when there is an obstacle is they either like dance around it and they're like, I will do anything but that, right? Think about the laundry that you've been putting off for 4 weeks. Like, I will do anything but that. And then you do go and attack that obstacle and you just attack it the wrong way.
Yeah. I think that something that always resonates with me when I read a book like this is yes, on one hand, it does kind of get repetitive if you've read a lot of self-help type books, self-improvement type stuff. But the positive side of that is it kind of breaks it down and makes you realize it's really not that complicated to make the right decisions, to create the right thinking patterns. And that's evidenced by the fact that so many successful people will talk about the same concepts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think when you can look for, I call them like Venn diagrams of what successful people do or in the fitness space, it's like if a lot of people who see a lot of success, not only with them, but with their clients, and they all agree on this concept or this principle, like eating more protein, weightlifting, getting sleep, it's like you should probably do those things, right? So
Mhm.
if Ryan Holiday, Jocko Willink, Marcus Aurelius, and Howard Schultz all say do this, well, freaking do this. Stop doing
Mhm.
the other thing because that's what makes them successful.
Yeah. For me, again, I'd rate it 9.5 out of 10 for readability. I just think Ryan Holiday is one of the easiest authors to read. And on top of that, he keeps the chapters really succinct. And so it's very easy to just feel like you're making progress. The words flow easily. He doesn't get too big and bold with the way that he talks about things. So I like that. Rating, go with an 8.5 out of 10. So just a little bit higher than Ego is the Enemy. But these are always good reads. Like I'd recommend this series of books to just about anyone out there. Being obstacle is the way, ego is the enemy, and stillness is the key.
Yeah, it's almost like we're starting out with some of our best players in
Mm-hmm.
a sporting game. It's that sense because these might be higher rated had we read average books before,
Mhm.
but because we're starting out, we don't want to just be like, it's a 10, it's a 10, it's a
Yeah.
10. And it might be like 9.5 out of 10. To your point, I'm going to recommend these books right up there with The Alchemist, right up there with More of Art and Turning Pro, right up there with The Four Agreements, where it's like, if you're struggling in any capacity, read and apply these, you're going to fix 90% of what's going on. And anything you
Yeah.
don't fix, just keep doing it and eventually you'll fix it.
Yeah. And something else I try to keep in mind with books is if you start reading a book and you're 50 pages in, you're halfway through, and it's not like an 8 or 9 out of 10, I don't think there's a really good reason to finish that book. Too often we run into the sunk cost fallacy with books where I started it, so I have to finish it. But there's just so many good books out there. Something I've tried to focus on more in the last year is just putting away a book if it's not resonating with me, because I know there's so many books. Like for any given person, there's 3, 4 dozen books that are going to be a 10 out of 10. And you just gotta go out and find those, what those are for you.
Yeah, totally. It's sunk cost fallacy. I was talking about that with someone from a food standpoint. They were saying they needed to get rid of all the food in their fridge. And I was like, you don't have to eat the DiGiorno pizza just because you bought it 4 months ago. You can
Mm-hmm.
throw that away. It's okay. And I totally get not wanting to like waste money, but you don't have to sink your own ship just to follow some principle that you have to a T.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway,
Yeah.
I want to dive into the best quotes
Yeah,
that
that's exactly what I was going to say,
yeah,
because I know
that
you said you had a couple in mind.
yeah, I got four, kind of five, and then we'll dive into takeaways and highlights after this. But the biggest quote that stood out to me, and one that I think will live with me forever, is "Stop looking for angels, start looking for angles." And this would have been in the perception part, the beginning of the book. And for me, this one stood out for so many reasons. One, because being in the fitness space, there's so many times where myself or clients, past and present, look for angels. And angels are essentially the things that you think are the magic pill. This angel is going to come down and save you in the form of a magic diet. This angel is going to come down and save you in the form of a Peloton. This angel is going to come down and save you in the form of this special class that nothing else has ever done in this way. Like, this is the magic piece. And there are no angels. No one's coming to save you. There's this TikTok audio that my fiance keeps having play, and it's always like, no one's coming to save you. No one's doing the work for you. Like, there are no angels that are going to come and take you off the path that you are on. You have to do that. And so then for him to, in the next sentence, say the exact same thing, but literally just change the E and the L to angles, was interesting, because we always look at this problem, right? We'll just say weight loss, and we look at it the same way. And it's like, that big problem becomes super manageable if you just change the angle. I was
Mm-hmm.
having this talk with our group call yesterday. A lot of people look at tracking their nutrition or following a structured workout program as restrictive. And if you look at that problem at the angle of it is restrictive, then that is what is going to become for you. And this is actually tied to a couple quotes I have after this. One where it says, choose not to be harmed and you won't feel harmed. Don't feel harmed and you haven't been. So it's like, if you label it as restrictive, it's going to be restrictive. If you label it as a framework or a structure or a system, it's not as big of a deal. We drive down very restrictive lanes on the road all the time. It's not like we get like free will to go just swerve left and right in the lane, but that's for a reason. It's so that we don't crash. It's for our own good. And so we don't look at those as restrictive driving. But if we say, hey, stay on this path from a nutrition and training standpoint, right? Oh my gosh, that's so restrictive. How could I
Mm-hmm.
ever? Right? We say like eating healthy is restrictive. It's like, no, that's not restrictive. And so the whole point I'm making is angles. How are you looking at this obstacle? That's how you're going to be able to navigate around it, as opposed to just taking the exact same approach, the exact same framework and how you think about it over and over and over. You're just hitting that obstacle where it is strongest.
Yeah. And it gives the opportunity again to, I think we brought up meditation and mindfulness in the last podcast, where this is where meditation resonates the most strongly with me, because it really is about training yourself to use perspective. So something happens, and that's the point of the whole first part of the book, where he says something happens and you have to look at it objectively. So there's some sort of quote where it's like something happens and then there's how we feel about it. But that's the choice that we have, is how we feel about it. We don't always have the choice of what happens, but we have the choice of how we react to it. And the reason that meditation and mindfulness plays such a big part in my life is because, a few years ago, before I discovered all this stuff, I was more likely to just react to things. But giving myself the chance to pause and reflect has really made such a big change in how I focus on anything from my health to relationships to choices I'm making in my career. Everything is made easier when you realize that you can look at things objectively and you don't just have to react. Ryan Holiday wrote about in the book how a deer sees something and it just immediately gets the instinct to react, to run. And luckily, as people with more with our formed brains, we can make the choice to not just react to things. I've repeated this a lot of times, but I always tell people when it comes to meditation, it's the practice of not ceasing to think, because sometimes that's the perception, is that meditation is ceasing to think, but really it's just a practice of not getting attached to every thought and not holding on to every thought and engaging with every thought.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I love that you brought in the meditation piece, because that's kind of like the mind side to the workout and nutrition side that I introduced.
And my one of my favorite quotes was really similar. Well, I guess it goes right in line with this concept, which is some of us almost crave sounding the alarm because it's easier than dealing with whatever is staring us in the face. So you'll notice this very often with people in your life, or even if you're someone who's guilty of this, where sometimes we just love to freak out. We love to talk about how poorly things are going. We love to talk about how everything is going wrong and not going how we planned it, because complaining feels like action. And sometimes just complaining can make you feel like you're making headway, even though you're not doing anything actionable. So I think that's important to keep in mind too, that it's not bad to have reaction. You're going to have reaction to things, but keep it in mind that you need to focus on what you can actually do, because just talking about it and just getting upset about it isn't really making any headway.
Yeah, and that concept always brings me back to turning pro, because it's the exact thing that amateurs do. Is they give in the book, he uses the word addictions, but it's essentially, it's like you're addicted to giving away your power to this bigger thing. So it's like, I can't go to work today, it's snowing. I would have, but like snow's on the road, can't drive. Or, oh, I would have, tried to lose that weight, but it's my genetics.
Mm-hmm.
If I didn't have my genetics, or it's like I can't focus at work. There's a war going on in Russia and Ukraine. It's like, if only there wasn't a war going on, then I would be able to focus. And people just fall in love with giving away their power. And like that's essentially what it is. It's saying,
Mm-hmm.
I would be able to do it, but I don't have the power to do that. Right. That's like what the annoying manager at the restaurant says. Like, I would be able to fix your food, but like that's the chef's thing. I can't fix that. Like, I wish I
Mm-hmm.
could. And it's like, man, if you want to piss me off, tell me you can't do something when you have the power to do something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and something that's always resonated with me, just because, again, like I know that I'm someone that tends towards this, where I can be more likely to complain, or not even complain, but when it comes to action, just talk about things and plan things without actually doing anything. So I don't remember exactly where I heard this, but I like the analogy of action is something that you can see someone doing on video, whereas other things are not action. So, for example, like planning what workouts you're going to do, planning your nutrition, like that's all well and good, but you have to drive to the gym and work out. You have to go into the kitchen and make your meals. Those are the sort of things you can see happening on video, and they're not just planning, they're not just thinking about things.
Hmm. Yeah, and this is kind of tied to one of the other quotes that I wrote down. We've all done it, said, so we say, I am so overwhelmed, tired, stressed, busy, blocked, outmatched. Then what do we do about it? We go out and party, we treat ourselves, we sleep in, we wait. It feels better to ignore or pretend, but you know deep down that this isn't going to truly make it any better. You've got to act, you've got to start now. So it's within that line of action that overwhelmed, tired, stressed, busy, blocked, outmatched. I can't do this. I'm so overwhelmed. I'm so tired. It really just, it's so simple, but that's the obstacle is the way, like, to bring
Mhm.
it to the title of the book.
Yeah, and another thing that I thought about a lot, especially in the beginning of this book, because there's a couple quotes that point towards this. But you mentioned Stephen Pressfield, and he talks about the resistance and how everyone faces the resistance, but it feels so individual. And I've been thinking about this quote a lot. I actually have it as the background on my phone for quite a while because I like to think about it in terms of coaching and in terms of writing for comedy, which is what's most personal is most universal. So it always feels like the struggles that we have, the wrong turns that we take, or the bad luck that we have feels very personal. And it just feels like it's very uniquely unfair to us. But if you break it down, everyone has, bad things happen. Everyone has struggles. And even if they don't look exactly the same in how they're played out, the implications of the hard times in life, everyone's going to have that sort of stuff. And so I think it just helps to talk about it, to realize that it's not just unique to you. That kind of takes some of the teeth out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. In my takeaways and highlight sections, I broke everything out by perception, action, and will, and just kind of like takeaways and highlights from that. And I think the will one kind of speaks to what you were talking about. And there's a few things that really stood out to me. Obviously he's going to take a lot of stoic angles on this and not reacting and just having this like very stone face. And there's the quote, I don't have it exactly, but with Billy King, where it was like the mind is really hard, the body's really smooth, and that's what made him such a good tennis player. The one that really stood out to me though is Abe Lincoln and him having depression. Like I don't know
Yeah.
how, I didn't know that, and it's interesting because this was like hundreds of years ago, and it's like, oh yeah, you're right, he's like diagnosed with depression, and back then they would have known to diagnose that. But anyway, I say all this because that's a really hard thing to be dealing with, especially as a leader. And there's so many times, and I'll put myself in this bucket where it's like, oh man, I can't do anything. Like I'm just so depressed right now, especially like during COVID when everything was like really shut down and wasn't going outside and I wasn't able to train and wasn't able to do my job. Like it was a very depressing time
Mm-hmm.
because your worth in a way is like ripped from you. And I guess what I'm getting at with that is like he talked about how Abe Lincoln would use that and he'd be like, you know what? I am depressed, but I'm still going to act in spite of that. And because he had had all those experiences, he was able to take that experience and still have that ironclad will to lead a country or to help other people. And basically taking this negative and like acknowledging it, being like, you're there, I see you, I'm going to continue on in spite of that, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm acknowledging you, not saying it's not real or not saying it's not a big deal, but then he's able to from there grow so much more and be a better leader because of that. And I think that's the thing that was really stood out is like taking all of these things that would be negative reasons to stop and turning them on their side, looking at them from a different angle and almost turning this obstacle as this block that you're going to stand on top of, and that's going to elevate you. And that's how you're using that obstacle as actually a way to grow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's hard or it's easy to forget this, but you don't motivate yourself into action, but rather you act your way into motivation. There's again, and it's something that I resonate with endlessly is just like overthinking, getting too in my head. But I always try to remember that you can always take steps to change your situation, but just continuing to think and try to look at things from all angles, while that's useful to an extent, is limited in the way that it can actually impact your situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I love that how that act your way into motivation. It's like you don't feel motivated on the first set, you feel motivated halfway through your workout.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and another great like workout analogy is, there's been lots of times where you felt this, I felt this, clients have felt this, where you don't want to go to the gym. It doesn't sound appealing, but then you get in there, you get warmed up, you get going, and either halfway through the workout, maybe not until the very end, but you feel great. You have this feeling of euphoria, and you're glad you did it. So that's another reason not to be ruled by your emotions, is because we're always going to want to take the easiest path, but we have to remember that the best things are often the long-term gratification that we get, even if it's just long-term of like what I'm going to feel like an hour from now after this workout, or what I'm going to feel like 5 years from now from focusing on my health.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the other things that I took away in the highlights was in the action part, and it was a section where he was talking about a review of all the wars that have happened and how few of them actually were won by two big armies coming together in this like epic Super Bowl type clash.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, what's right is what works. That was the name of the chapter. And we get stuck in this mindset of, oh, it's supposed to look like this.
Mm-hmm.
Sales is supposed to look like this. Working out is supposed to look like this. Eating healthy is supposed to look like this. And so we expect this big, glorious, like war battle, and that's how things get decided. But
Mm-hmm.
when you look at like the American Revolution, when you look at Vietnam, when you look at, different battles throughout history, it's not two sides coming and facing each other square off like you picture in the American Revolution photos of like the British and the redcoats. Like one army is using unique tactics, flanking, coming from the side, and doing anything necessary to win. And
Mm-hmm.
you see that all the time in these like David and Goliath sports movies where you're like, wait, they're using trick plays? Why aren't they just, taking the running back and going right down their throat? Or why aren't they using their bigger center to dunk on everyone? It's like because they don't have that.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to action, it's not about what you don't have. It's like how can you be crafty with what you do have and be really good at that? And at the end of the day, what's right is what works. If you win, doesn't matter how you won. If it was all trick plays, great. If it was all 3-pointers, great. If it was all, I go golfing and my friends always laugh at me because I refuse to chip. And I'm like, my putt, if it is terrible, will be nowhere near as bad as a
Mm-hmm.
bladed chip across the entire whatever. And so like golf's a really good example of that, where you can play the weirdest shot, but it doesn't matter. Like, did you get a par? Then
Mm-hmm.
that's ultimately what matters. How you got there doesn't matter. So I think to bring this into maybe like a nutrition lens, in someone's trying to get more protein or someone's trying to manage their cravings, it's like whatever you got to do. If you have to have 3 pieces of gum and some coffee and like chug a thing of water, great. If you have to have a really fibrous salad, great. But however you get there is how you get there.
Yeah, it's kind of like I think we can revisit that word should, like we talked about in the last podcast, whereas that angle was about how, we should do certain things to produce results. I think another angle on that is sometimes we'll say, well, this should be working. I've been doing paleo for 2 weeks. I should be losing weight. Well, if you're not, then you have to reassess your mindset because obviously it's not working. So just because something should work, quote unquote, you have to think about what the results you're actually getting are. And again, use objectivity like Ryan talks about in the book. Something that is a little bit of a sidetrack, but I thought would be useful for the conversation with these 3 books, as you were mentioning the Stoic philosophy, which is what Ryan Holiday is based in and writes about. And I think it's useful to kind of go over these 2 definitions because I remember, well, there's been multiple times when this has happened when I tell someone that I'm interested in Stoicism and talk about Stoicism, and a lot of times people think that that is the act of not being emotional and being divorced from feeling. And what's interesting is I think I saw this on the Daily Stoic, which is Ryan Holiday's company, and I guess just the website that he puts out a lot of stuff on. But he says that there's lowercase stoicism, which is the endurance of pain or hardship without the display of feelings and without complaint. And there's uppercase stoicism, which is the Greek school of thought and philosophy that virtue, the highest good, is based on knowledge, and the wise live in harmony with the divine reason that governs nature and are indifferent to the vicissitudes of fortune and pleasure and pain. So basically, meaning that it's not saying that you have to be completely closed off and unemotional. It just means that you accept the things you can't change and you work with objectivity. And so I think that too often people are turned off from stoicism because like, well, I don't want to not feel. And stoicism isn't not feeling. It's just looking at things objectively and working with things as they are, I suppose is the best way to define it.
Yeah, and those things that you can't control, having a little bit less of a reaction to them. To your
Mm-hmm.
point, it's like if if something is in your control or something is super pleasurable or super happy, like be happy, feel that emotion. But if it's raining, don't get all emotional about it. You can't control it.
Yeah.
Cool. Any other takeaways or highlights you had?
So I think at the beginning, like I said, this reminded me of a few overarching concepts that I try to think about in my life. And so a few of those, one that I really love that I try to think about all the time is Ryan. I don't know if he talks about this directly, but it reminded me to think about things in terms of systems over goals. So goals are I'm reaching for this specific outcome. I'll be upset if I don't reach it. I will not be done until I reach this specific goal, whereas systems are just ways of going about things. So if you have the system that you work out 4 days a week, and you have the system that you try to control your caloric intake in whatever way works for you, that's a system, and it's going to lead you to a preferred outcome. Whereas a goal to get down to 160 pounds, to bench press 250 pounds, whatever it is, that can lead to more of a feeling of inadequacy because you feel like you're not good enough until you reach the goal. Whereas with systems, you can feel good every single day that you follow your system. So that's one takeaway I had. Another one is fear setting. So this is something I think I initially heard from Tim Ferriss, which is if you're someone who is very prone to anxiety and overthinking things, sometimes it helps to just flesh things out totally. And fear setting is essentially telling yourself what's the worst case scenario and realizing that it's really not that bad. So at the beginning of the book, Ryan talks about how our primitive emotions can still make us feel like things in life are life or death. Like losing money can feel like life or death. Losing your job can feel like life or death. And those things suck and they're hard. But one of the memorable quotes from the beginning of the book is he says, oftentimes what we fear is getting laid off. And all that really means is you got to go and sleep in your parents' basement for a little while. And you have, it's set to a perfect 68 degrees and you have a perfectly comfortable bed and comfortable pillow. Like, it's not like you're going to be thrown out on the street for most people.
Yeah. No, I think fear setting is a really good example of reminding yourself that whatever that worst case scenario is, you can bounce back, and you actually can very systematically articulate how you would bounce back. Like if you're listening to this and you lost your job today, your CEO was like, "Hey, we've got zero money, you're fired," or like you're laid off. How long would it take you to find a job? 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, depending on how hard you worked or what you're willing to do. And it's like, that's 1 month. You'd bounce back no problem. And I think we underestimate how resilient and impressive and how powerful we are as humans. Maybe that's a good way to kind of wrap this up, is like recognizing your power and that obstacle that you're so afraid of or that you want to dance around and kind of like do everything but, right? Picture Sundays. It's like, you got to send that email, or you got to do the dishes, and you do everything but. And it's like the one thing that you're afraid of, going right into that, like right into the storm, the eye of the storm, is exactly what you need to do. And the solve to your problems is going to be on the other side of that.
Yeah, and just realizing that every single person, every single successful person especially, goes through trials and errors, and you have to embrace failure and embrace obstacles, because really that's the only way that you see what you're worth, the only way that you test yourself. And people that are born with a silver spoon and have everything they want their entire lives and don't ever go through anything difficult, I don't think those type of people are ever going to maximize what they're capable of doing. So even trying to adopt an attitude of being grateful for trials and tribulations, because you say, okay, well, now I'm going to see what I'm really capable of. So even changing your perspective in that way too, where you show gratitude towards those things, I think is another way to think about those obstacles in our lives.
Yep, absolutely. Cool, cool. So we just did the obstacles the way. Next week we'll do stillness is the key, which I think will be a little bit different than these two because it's very much tied to meditative, mindful based
Mm-hmm.
exercises. And so check that out next Tuesday. We got a couple updates in terms of what's coming down the pipeline. So last Thursday we released a Q&A. This Thursday we'll do a Q&A. So if you're not part of the Mindful Muscle Facebook group, be sure and join that and drop any questions that you want answered. We taking questions from there, from our social media, from clients, and then we answer those questions live on that Q&A every morning. I think it's 7 or 8 a.m. It's in the podcast, or it's in the Facebook group. The other one is if you are in the Seattle-based area, Fuller Nurture Fuel is doing doing a partnership with them where you get 15% off your first meal delivery. And so you can go online, order 7, 10, 14, maybe even just one meal, maybe 100 meals, who knows? And you can get 15% off your first order using the code Paul15. And then after that, you can use Paul10. But it's going to be fresh made meals delivered right to your door every Sunday and Wednesday. And you don't have to think about anything. It saves you time. Ultimately, it will save you money. And it's something that I've had a lot of clients jump on. I've jumped on it. It's kind of just a no-brainer in the term of eating well and saving time and saving money.
Yeah. And then if you can, at 5:30 Pacific time on Wednesday, I'm going to be doing a presentation on why the scale went up. So if you ever have those weekends where you have some binging and you wake up Monday morning, you're 5, 6, 7, 8 pounds heavier than you weighed in on Friday morning, and you've ever wondered, is this all fat gain? How long is this going to take to get rid of? What has happened here? I'm going to be going over stuff like that. And so if that sounds interesting to you, Paul and I will be dropping the link to sign up for that on our social media, in the Facebook group as well. So be sure to jump on there, or if you can't, at 5:30 p.m. on Wednesday, make sure to catch the replay, the recording.
Yep, we'll have the replay. And I think that's it, man. Is there anything? No, I don't think we missed anything. We'll catch you guys on the next Q&A on Thursday. We'll do Stillness is the Key next Tuesday. That'll be March 15th. And for all of that, I'm Paul.
And I'm Jake. Thanks for listening, guys.
Yep, we'll catch you guys next time on the Mindful Muscle Podcast.